Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith. Today we're going to be taking a look at Sony's new A5100. If you guys remember, we looked at the A6000 not long ago, but I never really looked at the A5000 because honestly I didn't really feel like, I kind of felt like the A5000 was too much of a compromise over the A6000, and so I wasn't terribly excited about it at all. They announced the A5100, and my first reaction was, "Wow, that was kind of soon." But after I looked at the specs, I realized that the awesome thing about this camera is the fact that it's 90% of what you get in an A6000, but in a smaller and lighter and less expensive body. It kind of reminds me of the differences between a Nikon D7100 and a Nikon D5300. For all you Nikon users out there, I know that I've got a lot more Nikon followers than Sony followers at this point. The other thing that I found interesting about this camera is that it's very incredible to me that Sony came out with something that's so close to the performance of the A6000. It's almost like they're competing with themselves, honestly. But I really don't care because for us as photographers, it really is a win because you're getting a lot of capabilities in something smaller, lighter, and less expensive. The A6000 retailed for a price of $799 USD with a 16 to 50 power zoom lens, and this camera comes in at $100 less. It's $699, so that makes things a lot more interesting right now. Anyways, let's go ahead and take a closer look at this camera, and we'll go over more of the details. A moment ago, I compared the differences between the A5100 and A6000 to the differences between a Nikon D7100 and D5300. Basically, the A6000 is like the D7100 in the sense that it's a little bit more advanced camera, in the sense that you get better controls. You have dual command dials for aperture and shutter speed adjustment. The A6000 gives us an electronic viewfinder. It gives us a hotshoe, and it shoots a little bit faster. So definitely worth the increase if you're going to be doing more photography, especially where you're going to be using the manual settings a lot and things like that. If, however, you're looking for extremely high image quality and you don't necessarily need any of those extra features and add-ons of the A6000, or if you just want to have a smaller and lighter body with the same level of image quality, that's where something like the A5100 comes in. One other thing that's interesting though is that just because the A5100 is a newer camera, it actually does have some advantages in certain areas. First of all though, taking a look at the control differences, if you look at the top of this camera, you realize it doesn't have a command dial like the A6000 does. If you've ever used any of Sony's other mirrorless cameras, like say for example an EX5 for example, you'll notice that the mode dial adjustment is pretty much the same way. You hit that middle selector button there, and as you rotate the dial, you get this virtual command dial that appears. Now, just because this camera doesn't have dual command dials doesn't mean that you can't do manual mode if you want to. It's just that this camera is not primarily designed to be shot that way, so they know that most people that buy this are going to be using the more automatic settings. So in manual mode, instead of having two command dials, basically this one dial does double duty. If you rotate it by itself there, you can see it changes our shutter speed. But if you want to change to f-stop, we just hit what's normally the exposure compensation button, and it toggles over to f-stop, and we can change that. So even though we don't have two dials, it's still very intuitive. And one other thing that's nice is the fact that the auto ISO still works in manual mode as well. And this is something that's very, very nice. I'm glad to see that Sony didn't remove that feature from this camera just because it's a lower model. Also notice that we have ISO adjustment in third stop increments there. So yeah, if you do want to do some manual shooting occasionally, I don't think you'll be disappointed by this camera at all, but just know that the A6000 gives you a lot more options. It's a little bit easier to change things, and of course having an electronic viewfinder does make a difference. However, one thing about this camera, even though it doesn't have an electronic viewfinder, the screen is actually, well, first of all, it's actually a touchscreen, which I thought was pretty cool. And the other thing is it's a bit more selfie friendly in the sense that it actually goes up this way. So yeah, if you want to take some selfies, shoot until your heart's content. Taking a look at the side of the camera, we pretty much have similar ports. Now, we don't have a microphone input on this. Once again, that's something that's typically found in higher models. But I did notice that on this camera, of course, this door opens all together here like this. And we have our USB, which is also used for charging. And then we have our card slot and our micro HDMI down here. But if you want to just say charge the camera, you can actually do this and not have to open the entire door. So I thought that was kind of a nice little nifty add-on. The other thing that this camera has that the A6000 doesn't is support for Sony's newer video format here. You guys will notice that this screen looks a little bit different than it does on the other E-mount cameras. So go into our camera settings there. Go to file format. Notice that we also have XAVCS here. This is something that I really wish would have made its way into the A6000, and it actually can be found on Sony's RX100 Mark III. Basically, this allows for video to be recorded at 50 megabits per second compared to the normal 28 megabit per second found in APS-C HD. One other thing that I've heard about this camera that I haven't played with yet is apparently it has the ability to record video in one format and then record a lower quality copy of it in MPEG-4. So that's kind of cool. You know, if you want to, record something and have a smaller copy that you can immediately upload to social media or something like that, but you want to have a higher quality version for editing, you can do that. Now, basically, think shooting RAW plus JPEG. It's kind of the same sort of thing, but apparently for video. I'll have to give that a go and see how it plays out in real-world scenarios and report back. So a pretty cool feature there. If we look at the bottom of the camera here, it has the same NP-FW50 battery that the A6000 and pretty much every other Sony mirrorless camera uses. But you get about 60 or 70 more shots per charge out of this camera versus the A6000, which is pretty cool. I always like to see the battery life improve on all the cameras in this range. And of course up here we have the now famous pop-up Sony Flash with its unofficial bounce support. Pretty much just like every other mirrorless camera in this range. And of course no hotshoe on this one. So that's something else that, if you want to be able to have a hotshoe, that's something that goes more hand in hand with more advanced photography, and that's something that you can find on an A6000. We do have the same focusing system on this camera too, though, as an A6000. So, very, very excellent. I'm not going to go over that entire thing again. You guys can check out my A6000 video. Pretty much the exact same focusing system on this camera too, so that's excellent. This camera is a little bit slower than the A6000. It can't shoot at the 11 frames per second with AF. This one does 6 frames a second with autofocus instead. But if you guys think about that, this camera is more like an entry-level DSLR. So if we look at other entry-level DSLRs, like say for example a Nikon D3300 or any of the Canon Rebels, those are going to do about 4 frames a second. This camera right here at 6 frames a second is already going to be faster than those. So even though it's not the 11 frames a second of an A6000, it's still going to be extremely fast. In terms of image quality, I will be doing some more testing on that, but honestly I'm not going to bother with too many samples this go because this camera does still use the same 24 megapixel sensor and it uses the same processor as an A6000. So even though it may be a little bit better, just because it's a newer camera and they may have made a few tweaks here and there, it's not going to be something that's going to be world-changingly different. So anyways, if you have seen pictures from the A6000, you've pretty much seen pictures from this camera for the most part. If you guys have any questions, write me in the comments below. We may be doing more videos with this camera in the future, just depending on the comments. And we are still going to be doing a comparison video between the Sony A6000 and RX100 Mark III, just as soon as I can get them both at the same time in the same place. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, signing off.